We are looking at a process that a man named Feldman created, and basically what that does is allows us to look at any work of art that's put in front of us and to interpret it, to try to figure out what the artist is trying to communicate to the viewer. So he created basically a four-step process, which I've condensed down to three that I think are the most relevant for what we do in class. So the three stages of art criticism start with description. Basically, what is the subject matter? What are you looking at? What is in front of your face? Analysis, how do the formal elements, principles of design, work within the image? And interpretation, taking everything that you've collected information-wise in description and analysis and create the story that the artist is trying to communicate to the viewer. So we're going to break this down one step at a time, and I just wanted to kind of walk you through this process a little bit, and at any point when I start to ask a question like, looking at this image, what do you see, or what draws your eye to this, just click pause, take a second, look at the image, do your thing, and then start back up, and I'll kind of walk you through what I was thinking. So that way you've got you're practicing as you're doing it, but then you get the feedback afterwards to see how kind of on target you might have been with the image that we're looking at. All right, so description starts with, if you look at your form, it's 1A, B, and C. So when you look at a work of art, if you can list things, they're recognizable images or objects that you can name from the natural world, it's representational art. So in this image, a dog, a person, a lake, boat, an oar, grass, trees. That means that it's representational of the natural world. We can identify things within it. In this first step, description, you are simply listing what you see. You're not interpreting anything at this point. So you would be doing the exact same thing I just did. And then non-representational art, 1B. So if you're looking at an image like this over here on the right-hand side, we're looking at geometric shapes. We're looking at color. We're looking at, line. We're not looking at specific things within the natural world, like a tree or a person. So when you are looking at a work of art, you're applying 1A and C or 1B and C. You're never going to apply all three. Because if something is representational, then it's not going to be non-representational. So in this case, with the image vivacially here on the right-hand side, you would be listing what you see, just like you did in the first one, but this time it's going to be circles, square, blue, dark blue, light blue, medium blue, red, green, pink, and things like that. Technical qualities, basically, try to figure out what the material is that the artwork is created out of. Is it two-dimensional? Is it three-dimensional? Both things I've showed you so far are paintings, so those are two-dimensional. And, if you don't know, if you visually can't tell the difference between acrylic paint, watercolor, oil paint, I don't think that's necessarily relevant to appreciating or understanding an image. But just knowing that what you're looking at here is a painting rather than a photograph of an actual object or something around us would be sufficient enough. So you could say it's two-dimensional and it appears to be a painting. Okay, analysis is step 2, and that's where you're breaking down the formal elements, line, shape, color, texture, size, relationships, all these kinds of things. And what you're doing is starting with the list that I have, and if anything else doesn't quite fit into those categories, but you notice them, then just add other and, write down some descriptive aspects of what you're seeing. So this is the same thing as description, where you're simply listing things. You're not really doing any analysis beforehand. However, in what we're doing and breaking things down, we are going to do a little bit of analysis at the same time, just to help things make a little bit more sense as we go. All right, so we're going to start with size. When you look at an image, is everything in proportion to one another? For example, we're looking at an image here with people. So are all the people the exact same size, or are they all proportional to one another? Does it make sense in terms of their scale relationships? If something is larger than everything else, or a lot smaller than everything else, that is probably what the artist is drawing your attention to, and is probably the focal point of the story at hand. So, for example, looking at the image on the left, I want you to think about what your eye is drawn to and why. So it's going to deal with size, but it's also going to deal with some of the other things that we will talk about as well. So feel free to pause, make your notes, and then come back and I'll walk you through some of the things that I was thinking of. All right, so with this central figure here is much larger than the other figures around her. And when you first see somebody that appears, or an object that appears much larger, look to the image for other clues. For example, are they closest to us compared to everybody else? If that were the case, then there would be a lot more distance between the feet on these people. Also, we're seeing that they're on the same level, ground level. So it's not like there is 20 feet in between the central person and the group of people. They're right up there together. So in this particular case, the artist made that figure much larger in order to draw your attention to her. What else is different about her that draws your eye to her? Well, the color of her garment has a lot more white highlights than the figures around her. So color plays into this as well. And then there's one other element that in particular that really draws your eye to that central figure, and it's the motion, the pointing of her arm. It's a directional line. It kind of, you look to the figure and then you look to the right part of the image, because she is directing not only the people within the image, but directing our eye to what lies beyond as well. All right, shape is also important. It can, if there's a lot of geometric shapes, it can imply a sense of structure, of order, of formality. It can also, as you see with the image here on the left-hand side, there's a lot going on within that, so it creates a lot of visual movement as well. Organic shape is everything that's not geometric. It's everything that's out in the organic world, natural world. It's us, it's birds, it's trees, it's nature. And that can give us a different feel than looking at the image on the left. So you have something that can be maybe quieter. It can seem to be softer, and other things like that. So sometimes shape is going to come into play in what you're looking at and can contribute to your interpretation ultimately in step 3. Color is another one that's really significant because it can impact us in so many ways. Color creates an image, and based on the colors that are in it, it can be very lively, or it can be very quiet and passive, and it can impact or affect our mood. For example, not always, but sometimes bright colors can imply a sense of being happy, of there being a lot of energy and excitement. While sometimes muted monochromatic colors can be something that are quieter, maybe sadder, more somber in nature. So here's another one. This one's by Matisse, and we have a lot of color in this particular image, but the figure doesn't necessarily look happy. So color is coming into play in a different way. So one thing I want you to do when you pause is to think about dividing this canvas down the middle and tell me which side of the canvas, the left or the right, you think is more realistic in its rendering and why. And then tell me what the opposite side must be communicating if the other one is representing the realistic outside, outwardly expression of the individual. Okay, so dividing the canvas down the middle, we have the left and the right, very different use of color on both sides. And I think I will say with art that you can make a good defense for an answer like to the question that I posed using either side of the canvas. But there are a few more clues, I think, that when you piece it together will basically suggest that the right-hand side of the image is more representational of the outside world, the real world. A couple of visual clues that do that. First, we have the pink kind of coloration of her flesh, a little bit more lifelike in terms of what we would see when looking at another person than the yellowish cast to the side on the left. Also, when you're looking at the face, look to how the different aspects of her face are depicted. The definition of the eyebrow, of the eye, of the nose, of the mouth are a little bit crisper. Have a little bit more detail, attention paid to that. They're not as loose in terms of brushstroke. So it's defining her a little bit more clearly for us. We can also see that at the bottom in terms of the clothing as well. A little bit crisper, clearer definition. And then the last thing in particular that I want to point out is the background itself. It's one solid color. Typically, if you look at that background as a whole, and then think about how people would paint their home, they typically wouldn't divide one single wall into, half blue and then the other half divided into, kind of a mauve color, lavender, and then orange down below. So just, thinking about what normally you would experience would then kind of reinforce the idea that the right-hand side is expressing the real world, what we would see when looking at this person. So what does that tell us that the left-hand side represents? Well, if the right-hand side is the outer world, then the left-hand side would be the inner world, her mental, emotional state. She's presenting herself to us almost with a mask when you look at this particular, image on the right. But the inside, what's really going on within her is expressed through the looser brushstrokes. It's expressed through the variety of color, the use of yellow and orange and lavender. Think about connotations of those colors, what they might represent, or just the fact that they're jumbled together and that there's maybe just a sense of conflict or turmoil that the calmness of the other half of the image isn't showing us. So it's kind of capturing pretty well how we are as people. There are people who will lay everything out there. They wear their heart on the sleeve, but a lot of people basically will present themselves one way to the public and kind of guard what's really going on within them inside. Keep it more personal. All right, that ends portion 1.